Okay, so now, and I'm gonna push back a little bit on something that you said because, look, I know that I know that anti-Mormons are absolutely crazy and toxic, and I don't want to ever be caught defending them. However, I think their concern is legitimate because the majority of members of the church and all the apostles and all the prophets since the beginning of the restoration, I believe, have manifestly, overtly, publicly taught the infinite regress of gods.
That's false for my survey.
Yeah, well, I think you're wrong because, like,
Well,
I didn't even realize there was another option. I mean, I grew
what
up
you're
in the
making,
church. I
what
didn't
you're
realize
asserting
that
is an
you could.
empirical issue. What you're asserting is an empirical issue that's demonstrated by taking a poll that's reliable, and you haven't done that, so you don't know what percentage of church members hold that belief.
Touche. Neither have you.
I haven't, but I'm not making the assertion that the majority of church members believe something, am I? You are. Moreover, and here's the bottom line, the church hasn't, in general conference, in the past 50 years, really hasn't addressed this issue at all.
Well, prior to 50 years, did they address the issue?
And yeah, they do. Some of them held different views. This is not a cut and dried issue, and
look, I'm not trying to argue with you. I'm trying to help you. If you tell our critics or historians and say, "Oh, no, infinite regress is some fringe thing that has never been official doctrine," they're gonna rightfully say you're wrong. This is all over
official doctrine.
History.
I'm not wrong. It's not official doctrine.
No, and I'm not. No, I'm not saying it's I'm not saying it's official doctrine. But it really sounds like trying to distance oneself from the teachings of our historical leaders.
I'm distancing myself from an interpretation and an understanding that I don't think is an accurate best take on what is actually
and that's
stated.
Totally fair. That's totally fair to say I interpret these things differently. But you got to be able to understand when the antis say, hold on a minute. All these statements, all these pages, and all these sermons from all these leaders all the way up into the 1970s all sound like they're teaching this doctrine. You can't just ignore that, right? That's what they're going to say.
Yeah, but it wasn't taught that way. I mean, you haven't really had it fully addressed in this way since Brigham Young. I mean, there hasn't been an explicit take on this to make sense of it from a prophet while being prophet. And I mean, look at what happened in the 1990s when President Hinckley was asked about this doctrine. Okay. He said, I don't think we know much about that. That was his actual answer.
Right.
And so when we're actually dealing with this kind of an issue, what we ought to do is urge caution and acknowledge that there are Mormons who believe it. Brigham Young actually taught it. Okay. But there's a lot that Brigham Young taught that we're not going to adopt now. I hope you understand that.
But now, if Brigham Young taught things that were untrue, which I think we very reflexively and far too quickly dismiss many of the teachings of Brigham Young. Brigham Young.
With that, I agree with you on that. What I don't agree with is that everything he taught was inspired, and you don't either. We have an express doctrine of prophetic fallibility. We have an express doctrine that limits what is binding on the saints to what is accepted by common consent. We have an express recognition that nothing delivered to human beings is 100% complete because we have ongoing revelation. And so if somebody wants to close the door and say, no, this is what Brigham Young taught, that's the end of the discussion, not even Brigham Young would have agreed with that.
And that is not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that if you're going to pretend like the antis are going to let you off the hook for this, you're delusional.
They don't care what the antis think.
No,
I have the benefit of not caring what any anti-Mormon thinks.
Right. No, and I
yeah,
agree
but we like, so to me,
look, it doesn't matter. Hold on. It doesn't matter if the antis say this, but your youth and my youth are going to Google this and they're going to say this has been taught for decades. And I can't just ignore it and pretend like it didn't exist.
It's pretty hard to find teachings of this. If you go through the historical record.
Joseph Fielding Smith, Lorenzo Snow, they all taught it.
Joseph Fielding Smith taught it in Doctrines of Salvation, and B.H. Roberts mentions it. But the idea that this is repeated over the pulpit regularly in every single general conference,
which is not what I've said, and no one has said.
No, he's saying that anti-Mormons say that.
You're going to have a teenager who is going to Google these things.
Well, yeah, but that's what
teenager's going to say. Why are you running away from these teachings? And you can't just shrug and be like, it's just like.
It's been really fun to see a lot of people take this and say stuff like, I didn't even realize that all of this theological nuance existed within the church, or that there were different thinkers who have had different opinions on these debates.
So I had no idea that non-infinite regress was even an option. And I'm not being funny. Like, I literally did not until like a year ago.
That's so interesting to me.
Like a year ago, somebody was like, oh, no, infinite regress. And I was like, what?